Have you ever made that one mistake? The mistake that you thought was going to end everything. The mistake that was so bad you didn't think you could ever recover from it. I mean, maybe this mistake was something simple. Maybe it was completely innocent. But it still felt like it was the end of the world. Or maybe it was not such an innocent mistake. Maybe it was something you did in a moment of weakness that you regretted instantly. That you wish you could go back and change, but you knew that it was too late. That it was done, and now you had to deal with the consequences. Have you ever done that? Have you ever had that happen? I think we all have to some degree or another. And if we haven't, we know somebody who has. And we've all seen the things that happen in the news, the stories that go around in year to year in our culture, and the people who make mistakes. So we see these things, and we know that people make mistakes, and we make mistakes. But the question that always comes from this is, what's going to happen? Now here's the thing. We make mistakes. Humans have always made mistakes. Even the Israelites made mistakes. I mean, I don't think that's hard to believe, right? If you've read their story, you know the kind of mistakes they've made. And we've already seen some of those. But they still need to make a bigger mistake that we haven't heard yet. And today, that's the story we look at. And we're going to see what happens when we make a mistake. So if you need to take out your Bibles and turn to Exodus 32, we're going to be chapter 32, verse 1 is where we're starting. And here in a moment, when you see the verses on the bottom of the screen, I don't want you to freak out and think we're going to look at all of those verses. We're just skipping around in that section a little bit, and I didn't want to have to be specific on every slide. So Exodus chapter 32 starts on page 123 in the Pew Bible if you want to follow along. Also, it will be on the screen. So let's take a look at this story as we continue to look at the story of Moses and the Israelites in Exodus. And we're going to see this mistake and how it's dealt with. So this is how this starts. 32:1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." So if you hear a couple weeks ago, I said that the story of Exodus, the first basically 20 chapters, a lot of things happen. I mean, it goes from Moses being a baby to Moses being an adult, to him being exiled, to him to being called and sent back, to all of the plagues and everything happening. And then they get all the way to Sinai. And once you get to chapter 20, things just stop. And the story slows down. And that's because Moses spends 40 days on the mountain. And I said 2 weeks ago, when this happens, he gets on the mountain, two important events happen. And we looked at that first important event a couple weeks ago. That's whenever he gets the instructions for the tabernacle, and then they're supposed to build it. That's the first important thing. Now, the second important thing is the story we look at today. It's the story whenever the Israelites are like, okay, Moses isn't coming down the mountain. Something's happened to this guy. And they go to Aaron and they say, "Can you solve our problem?" Moses is gone. Now, the reason they're worried is Moses is their connection to Yahweh. He is their mediator. He is the man in the middle between them and God. So if he's gone, their thought process is, okay, we need to get a new mediator. We need somebody who can restore that connection. And the natural thing for them to do as ancient Near Eastern people is they want to have an image of their God who is going to be their representative, their middleman. And so they go to Aaron and they say, okay, Moses is gone. Can you please make us somebody else? Because we need this connection to be restored. So this is Aaron's response in verse 2 and 3. So Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives and your sons and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with tools. So Aaron basically is a huge pushover. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't push back. He doesn't say, hey, wait a minute. Maybe Moses will be back. Let's wait. They already heard the 10 Commandments. Number 2, have no images. And they're wanting to break that commandment already. But Aaron doesn't say anything. He says, okay, well, I will do what you ask. Just give me some gold. And they make this calf. And so what they would do is they would make it out of wood, and they would just put the gold on the outside. So it wasn't solid gold. It was just wood with gold underneath of it. So you might wonder, why a calf? So in the ancient Near East, we've actually dug up, not me, archaeologists have dug up a bunch of calves and different little trinkets like this. Now, calves or bulls, because the calves were, baby bulls, represented fertility and power, but normally deities would ride them or stand on them. But in this case, the actual bull calf is supposed to be the god. So this was normal for them to see images of calves depicted as representing their gods. So that was completely normal to them. They thought they were doing the right thing. Now, I think a question we always ask them is like, hey, so are they making a new god? Do they think that this calf is in some way this new god that they have? Well, this becomes clear as we keep going to verse 4. This is what they say. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. And this is the people, after Aaron gives them the calf, saying, hey, people, here is your God that brought you out of Egypt. And so I think it's important for us to realize they're not trying to replace Yahweh. They just want that new representative, and they think that the calf is going to be that new representative because they misunderstand the situation. They misunderstand what's going on. And that's also what Aaron thinks, because look what he does then. Verse 5, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to Yahweh. That's, remember, when it's capitalized, which it's not here because I didn't capitalize it when I copied it over. We're making a festival to Yahweh. So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry, and probably the worst kind. All right? It was not a pretty scene. The people were doing what they thought they were supposed to. They had this new mediator who was going to bless them, who was going to be this middleman between them and Yahweh, and they were offering their sacrifices and throwing this festival to celebrate his presence. They thought they had this new Yahweh. But like I said, they forgot about the second commandment. Don't make any image and put it before me. Because I've already made an image, and it's you. Remember, the people we're made in God's image. We represent him. For them to put that bull in that place was for them to actually lift up something in creation above themselves and to misunderstand the relationship that Yahweh wanted with them, which was a relationship, remember, when they could actually go into his presence and be with him. They didn't need a middleman. They were supposed to be able to have that direct connection. That's what Yahweh wanted. That's what he was trying to restore in the tabernacle. He wanted to live in their presence. But they failed. So I think we need to stop at this point in this story and realize that for Israel, like, we look at this story and we're like, how silly. Those people. But they were living in their times. Now, if we really wanted to, I'm sure we could look at our lives and we could find some examples where we've built ourselves some calves and we thought we were worshiping God. I'm sure we have. Because we all make mistakes. We all fail to live up to the way of Jesus. In some ways, in very drastic, dangerous ways. The church has done that in the past, throughout history. We've put things in the place of God. We've made mistakes. But that's when we get to this $1 million question. So what does this mean for the Israelites? And what does it mean for us when we make a mistake? When we do something wrong? When we put something in the place of God? When we fail to understand who we are and who he made us to be? What does that mean for us? Well, when we go to verse 7, we see what happens. Remember, Moses is on the mountain. So this is what happens when he's on the mountain. Then the Lord Yahweh said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf or an image. It's all the same word. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. So Moses is on the mountain and he's getting these instructions from Yahweh. He's been given the tablets that have the commandments on them. He's been giving those instructions for the tabernacle and some other things. He's on the mountain, and all of a sudden, he has to go. But before he goes, look what he says. Or actually, this is first what Yahweh says to Moses. I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. So Yahweh is going to seek justice. And this is the natural consequence of sin. Now this is the part of the story that people don't want to hear. When we make mistakes, when we call it a mistake, it was an accident, a misstep. But when it's sin and when it's something that's part of our brokenness, and sometimes the evil in us that we actually do things that are evil, the consequence for that is supposed to be justice in death. And so these people, and I think when you read the story, it doesn't seem as if it was all of the people, it was just part of them. And so Yahweh is like, I'm going to seek justice because of what has happened. Now Moses steps in right away. Verse 15. Moses turned and went down the mountain. Actually, we're skipping what he says. We're going to see it in a moment. But we're skipping what he says, and we're going to see what he does. So he goes down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. So he's going down with the tablets that have these commandments on them. It represents the covenant they just made, that they weren't going to break the commandments. This is the physical representation of this agreement. And Moses is carrying it down the mountain as the people break the agreement. And when he gets to the bottom of the mountain, verse 19, Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing. His anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. Now, I think we normally would have read this in the past and viewed this as a bad thing. Like, how could Moses have taken those tablets that Yahweh just made and broke them? How irresponsible of him. But I really think that this is the author's showing us very physically what happened. That covenant that Israel just made with Yahweh, they just shattered it. That whole agreement that God offered to them was breaking before them because of their decision, because of their mistake. And this is what Moses does to the calf. And he took the calf that people had made and he burned it in the fire. Then he ground it into powder. He scattered it on the water and made the Israelites drink it. Now that line, you're probably like, whoa. I mean, like, is this going to be some sort of like heavy metal poisoning or something? Was there mercury or lead in that calf somewhere? That's what I always think about. So we realize that this is actually this sort of way of representing in the ancient world that it was completely destroyed. So basically, Moses exerts the fact that he has power over this image, and it really is worthless. And he destroys it before the people, and he shows them, this is not your God. It never was. And he destroys it. And then this is what he does. So then he stood at the entrance to the camp and he said, whoever is for Yahweh, come to me. And all the Levites rallied to him. And then he said to them, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side, go back and forth through the camp, from one side to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor. The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day, about 3,000 of the people died. Now, this is when we get really uncomfortable, when we read the Bible. We have to sit in that discomfort and realize what the story is showing us. It's showing us the severity of sin and the consequences of it. And the fact that these family members had to enact justice for or against their own family. Now, they did it by choice. Moses said, who here will stand with Yahweh? Who is still committed? And this is what they were asked to do. Now, what we need to realize is this is actually what needs to happen to all of us, not the situation. Not as if we need to strap on swords and people need to seek justice. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that death is the result of sin. And if God were to bring justice that is due on the world, we all would be found guilty. We all would be, another way to talk about it is in debt to justice. And we would never be able to pay back that debt. We would never be able to get on the right side of the ledger. Sin must be judged as evil. Because it is. Because it breaks down that harmony. Remember, it's all about the harmony. God made the world with order and purpose. And sin takes that order and purpose and it crumbles it. It destroys it. It breaks it apart. It brings chaos. And because of that, it must be ruled against. We want justice, right? Because we have been wronged. We see the horrible things that happen in the world. And we want those things to be righted. So what kind of God would not right those things? But we sometimes fail to miss is that means that we also have things we've done. So the big question then becomes, okay, well then, if we're all supposed to have justice and judgment, well, what are we supposed to do? And so now let's go back and actually see what Moses said before he left the mountain. Verse 11. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord, of Yahweh his God, and he said, Lord, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was the evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. And I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. So remember, that's the promise that Yahweh, Moses is quoting Yahweh there. Then verse 14. Then Yahweh relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. So I think there's room to wonder, did Moses actually act outside of what Yahweh wanted when he commanded the people be slaughtered? It's hard to know. I mean, Moses said that he's acting on Yahweh's behalf. The text doesn't actually say that Yahweh tells him to do it. Right here, Moses begs for them to be spared. And it seems as if Yahweh lets them be spared. So in the middle of all this, Moses recognizes that God has a heart to forgive. That he has a heart to promise to restore people. That was the whole point of that promise to Abraham. And so Moses says, don't forget who you are. And Yahweh's like, I know, you're right. That is who I am. And that's who I'm going to be. A God who seeks and offers forgiveness. And so that's what Moses said. And then once he got to the mountain, after everything happened with the people, this is what he says in verse 30. The next day, Moses said to the people, he's okay, this has happened. He says, you have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord, to Yahweh. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. So Moses went back to Yahweh and said, oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me, look what he says, blot me out of the book you have written. This is so important. So Moses goes to Yahweh. He says, I know what your people have done. He said, I know that they deserve death. He says, but remember who you are. And if nothing else, blot me out instead. Remove me from your book and keep them in your book of life. So Moses offers himself as a sacrifice to Yahweh on behalf of the people. He says, let me see if I can make atonement. Let me see if I can repair this broken relationship now. You were supposed to have this special relationship. Yahweh was going to move in the tabernacle and live with you. But now you've broken everything. You've blown it all up. Let me see if I can make it right. And then he goes to Yahweh and he says, I will be the sacrifice if I have to be. If you need to somehow require death, let it be me. Forgiveness isn't free. This is the thing we cannot forget. Because justice and sin is that evil. There's people who say, why couldn't God have made a world where he can just forgive sins without needing death or blood? That's how destructive death is. And so Yahweh says, or Moses says, take me, because forgiveness isn't free. So Moses advocates for the people. And so Yahweh first says, okay, well, I will spare them, but I'm not going to go with them anymore. I'm not going to be there. And then Moses says this, verse 30, we're now down in chapter 33. Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? So Yahweh says, okay, well, I will spare you, but I'm going to remove my presence from you. I'm no longer going to come in the tabernacle. And Moses says, that's not going to work. That's what made this whole thing special. You were going to move back in with your people, and you were going to live with us. And so Moses continues to push. And he says this in verse 17. And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you, and I know you, Moses, by name. And so then Moses advocates, and Yahweh actually shows him his presence. If you know some of those stories, basically Moses can't see Yahweh with his eyes, so Yahweh covers him and sees his glory, his back. And then Moses comes out of the tent, and his face is like shining. It's like a human flashlight. And the people are terrified, and they won't look at him, so he has to cover his face. And so here's what's actually going on. Remember, Moses says, take me as a sacrifice instead. And then he enters the tent of meeting. Okay, so remember the tabernacle. It's the most holy place, the place where the Ark of the Covenant goes. The priest was supposed to go in there once a year and sprinkle blood on that, and that was the Day of Atonement. But nobody went back there. Nobody got to see behind that veil, behind that curtain. Moses is now behind the curtain because he is the sacrifice. So he gets his life spared, but he becomes this sacrifice for Israel. And because he is willing to do this, Israel is spared. And you know what happens? Moses is never allowed in the presence of Yahweh again. We get to the end of Exodus chapter 40, and they set up the tabernacle, and it says Moses can't go in. Now, one of the reasons he's not a priest like his brother Aaron, but also I think it's because he is the sacrifice. Now, all of it's done. Moses becomes the sacrifice so that Yahweh spares the people. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like the greatest Moses, Jesus. So Moses has this moment of offering himself for the people, and he is able to do it in a way where he doesn't offer his life. But his life is altered. And his relationship with Yahweh has changed, but it's for the people. And then Jesus comes. And Jesus is the sacrifice that offers himself in death, in our place. And then he's resurrected out of death so that we might have life. So here's what we need to understand. Because of Jesus, we receive God's grace and mercy. We don't receive the justice or the judgment. Instead, we get the grace and mercy that Israel got. But somebody has to pay the price. Forgiveness isn't free. Because of Jesus, we receive God's grace and mercy. And right here with the tabernacle in Israel, we see that they also needed someone in their place. And that was always Moses. He was there from the beginning. He was there in the middle. He was there in the end. He was their mediator, the guy in the middle. And then Jesus becomes the ultimate Moses. Because of Jesus, we receive God's grace and mercy. Because of Jesus, we actually can go into God's presence. Because of Jesus, we're set free from the power of sin and death. And so right here in Exodus, we see the beginning of what Jesus does on the cross. We see the groundwork being laid for what's going to happen later. Justice will be served, but Jesus will be the one who receives the judgment and the justice. We can't miss the fact that he bore our sins so that we might be forgiven. And then that he was resurrected so that we might be set free. We do make mistakes. We are sinners. But that's not our identity anymore. Because of Jesus, we receive God's mercy and grace. So may we turn to Jesus today. And so if that's you, if that's all of us, giving our allegiance to Jesus, following him, receiving his gift of life by giving our obedience to him, we follow him in response to what he's given us. So if that is you, I encourage you to every day continue. If that isn't you, if you're like, I don't know if I've actually said yes to Jesus, by all means, please talk to me. Because of Jesus, we receive God's mercy and grace.